of my first green lights was a show called Syphil and Ollie, and it was two talking socks. The very first thing was a very low rated show with two talking socks, but those were the kind of creative risks I wanted us to be able to take.
Welcome back, everyone, to another amazing episode of Welcome to the Music Lounge. Perry, nice to see you.
I'm super excited about today, Andrew. This has been a while in the making. I know we usually start with like how we're doing and all of that, but I kind of want to jump right into it today.
Sure, let's do it.
Yeah. I mean, this has been somebody that we've talked about having on the show for a really long time, and we finally are making it happening today. So I would really like to welcome Brian Graden to the show, formerly president of the Entertainment Music Group at MTV, president of Logo, currently head of Brian Graden Media. They have had over 30 series produced, won 2 Emmys, 4 nominations, and he's got a special new skill that we'll talk about later in the show. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
How you doing, Brian? Good to see you.
Doing very well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And I don't know if you remember, I started my career in corporate communications in LA, working with Linda Alexander, Vanessa Reyes, and they were situated right next to your office. And when I decided to make the move to New York, Lorna, your old assistant, actually was the one to refer me and recommend me to Paul. So it was really me being that close to your group, figuring out in my early career, wow, I think programming is somewhere I need to be. So thank you. But that really spearheaded my career, I think, out, into programming and content strategy, and
makes me really happy.
So that was good.
So, this podcast kind of focuses on MTV and sort of what we call the TRL era, late 90s to about early 2010s. MTV at that time was sort of firing on all cylinders. Basically, everything happening in pop culture at that time sort of was filtered through MTV. We actually refer to it as the original influencer. So give us a quick rundown of your career pre-MTV, what brought you to the channel, and was MTV a big influence on you growing up?
Sure. MTV was a huge influence on me growing up. I remember exactly where I was when I first saw MTV, and I played with my buddies in the cul-de-sac in a band. And one of the guys, their father got a giant satellite that was like 20 feet wide back when that's how you got the signal for HBO, and that's why they got it. And we all went to his house, and I think I was 16, 17, and saw MTV for the first time, and we were just mesmerized because we had grown up in a world of 3 channels, which, sounds very archaic, but to suddenly have something that reflected you and your values and then was showing you people like B-52s and Devo and the Cars, it was just a trip. And it is impossible to overstate how influential it became in all of our lives and how it was the only singular source and the first singular source that really reflected what our generation was about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Career-wise, I always dreamed of working at MTV, but I was a kid from a small town. So I went to college, got a job as an accountant because that's what I thought you could do to make some money. And I freaking sucked at it. I hated it. So I applied to Harvard Business School as a way of kind of maybe pivoting career-wise. And it was there that I decided I was just going to take a flyer and work for the smartest person I could find in television and work for free. And that's what I did during the summer between the years of business school. And that turned into a career at Fox for the next 7 years. Really enjoyed that. One of my first jobs was working on a brand new show called Cops. And I rode along in the backseat of the cop cars. And when the cops would bust into the house, my job was to crawl in the yard so you didn't get hit by bullets, and then wait for the right moment to go in and try to get a criminal who had just been arrested to sign a release to be on TV.
Oh my God.
It was going to sign that release, and everybody wanted to be on TV. So we had like a 98% conversion rate of people who were just getting arrested be like, oh, cops, sure. But anyway, that was my first job in television. After being there for 7 years in development, I had developed a show called South Park, and nobody at Fox wanted it. And I don't tell this story often because I don't want Fox to come after me 25 years later and try to own it. But they gave us the rights to take it. And so Matt Trey and I left, formed a company, sold it to Comedy Central. MTV had offered me a job a year prior to my taking it, but I didn't want to move. And so after South Park got a lot of momentum, Judy called me back and said, okay, let's try this bi-coastal. And so then finally, years after applying for an internship and getting rejected, I finally got a job overseeing series. And then shortly thereafter, overseeing all the content.
That's amazing. So I have two follow-up questions. One, if we watch old episodes of Cops, will we see you on it?
No, but I'm sure there's footage that could back up what I said. Yeah.
And two, I hope your deal points had something to do with what their recent payout was from Paramount to continue doing the show. That you had some percentage of that.
I've made a policy never to talk about that, but
That's okay. That's okay.
There's a reason I don't work anymore. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. There we go.
Must
Excellent.
be nice. Must be nice. We had Paul de Benedettis on probably a couple months ago, and he gave us a deep dive into what programming is. Most of us know from the MTV world that it's scheduling shows and trying to attract an audience and advertisers. What was your philosophy of kind of overseeing programming at MTV, and how did you kind of want the programming team to work so closely with other departments?
Sure. To me, programming was making great shit. And then downstream of that, Paul and I had to work to schedule it correctly, to make sure it would get marketed, all of that stuff. But it began and ended with finding ideas that people wanted to watch. And I had a very impactful experience in my first 8 weeks at MTV. It was I don't know how to explain it. 30 people would come to the staff meeting, and the loudest people could kind of prevail in that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember somebody showed this new cyber VJ called Cyber Cindy. And it actually was an idea that had some real potential. At least it was novel and good development. And then the room proceeded to trash it. And you had people from every department offering opinions. And that had a real impression on me. And so I did something kind of counterintuitive, but I built a bit of a wall around programming. And it wasn't because I didn't want to be collaborative with other departments. It wasn't because I think that's the right way to work in all situations. But I felt like, in the same way that I shouldn't make decisions about finance, God forbid, finance shouldn't make decisions about programming. And that my job was to protect the development process. And the development process is long and arduous and full of failure. And it takes, the average show 2 years to get on television. It takes a presentation, tape, a pilot, focus groups, all of this stuff. And if you allow tons of people to weigh in along the way before you can even see the final product, it just derails things. So I built a bit of a wall around programming, and we would make our green lights, and then we would have a lot of fanfare around unveiling them to the rest of the team, and then try to get press excited and every department excited.
Right.
But I did try to keep them out of the decision-making process, the creative process. And on the other side of it, as a producer, I can tell you that networks don't generally do that. When we submit a pilot, we know it's going to get evaluated by 40 people who may know nothing about programming.
Yeah.
So going back to the programming offsites that we used to have at Montauk and in the Bacara for a couple years in Santa Barbara, which was, one of the highlights of my time at MTV, just to be able to go to those lavish places. But is that process similar to what other networks, or did you think that in that environment, watching, discussing, greenlighting shows, potentially having the stars of those shows come as well, was almost a better sell? And was that a better process for you guys to kind of greenlight or not greenlight shows?
I think it was kind of invented for MTV. One of the things about MTV is we were programming weekends, afternoons, and primetime. So the beast was hungry constantly. And then at MTV, unlike other networks, the show would be hot and then burn out in 3 years. So we didn't have a Seinfeld that ran 9 seasons. So I knew there had to be new content all the time. And I also knew that creative processes can go on forever if you let them. And so 3 times a year, we would say there's going to be a screening, and it would really kind of help artists know that you were for real, that there was a date when their stuff would actually be seen, and they would get an answer the next day. And I can tell you, on the other side, as a producer, I wished that other networks had that predictability. So that's why we did it. And I also wanted to create fanfare around the delivery of the content. And if you remember, people really came hyped to put their best foot forward, because it was a bit of a public screening. And that was by design too, because instead of having me make all the decisions, I actually gave the development money to like 7 different executives so that we would have different opinions and artistic voices expressed on the TV ultimately. And, Dave was very serious about news and Lois was very serious about talent. And, each department had a different angle. And it created a competition to some degree. So you wanted to show up at that screening with your best work and your best foot forward, and the tape had to speak for itself. You couldn't stand up and say why it's great. The tape had to work. And at the end of the day, the audience only sees the video. They don't see what your ideas are about what it could be.
Right.
It's not a case study, it's the actual pilot,
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
so there was a lot of thought that went into the design of it. And I don't know of any other network who did it quite that way.
Yeah. And I can see now you did create that wall because everyone who was invited was, in that development process. They've worked on the show. They would potentially be involved in the launch of it. So it was a very tight group of people.
I don't know if you remember too, you can feel an audience reaction in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think at the end of the day, 80% of the decisions were already understood. People knew where the yeses and nos were because you could feel it in the room. And that made my job a lot easier too, because then it wasn't Brian saying yes, yes, no. It was kind of like, we put it out there, you felt the room, there we go.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
I remember the Osbournes and some of those iconic shows. I wasn't part of that process, but to have an eye into that creativity was amazing.
Oh, that's awesome.
How would you define a hit show? Like audience numbers, critical response, cultural impact, introducing the audience to unique talent? And by those metrics, what were some of the hits that you developed and programmed at MTV? And is there one show that holds a special place in your heart?
Sure. A few questions in there. The 4 things that you mentioned, talent, audience engagement, cultural impact, those things all mattered. But what I noticed when I first got there is they all mattered to the exclusion of ratings, which, is audience engagement. And so one of my jobs was really to orient the team back to the idea that ratings were a good thing, not a bad thing. There was a perception that if it was rated, it was therefore mass and therefore uncool. And that's all well and good, except then the lights would have went off at MTV and I felt a responsibility to keep the lights on.
Right.
So I really tried to orient people back to the idea that we could be cool, we could have talent, we could, have cultural impact and get an audience at the same time. So I think we would be lying to ourselves if we didn't say audience engagement was the most important thing. But then we were always thrilled if we could hit 1 or 2 of those other beats with a particular show. And if I were to think back through, the time there were things like Laguna Beach that had great cultural impact. There were shows like Wonder Chosen that me and like 6 of my friends watched, and that was it. But the New York Times wrote about it, and that was important, and that sort of made us cool. There were a lot of things we did in the music space that was very talent friendly, like Diary, but it wasn't always the best rated thing, but people wanted to be on it. And so all of those things could be Jackass Sundays that really kind of embodied the rock and roll spirit of MTV. I was trying to think, so every like block or show kind of hit different beats as well as got big ratings. That's what I'm trying to say. The 2 shows that hold the most special place in my heart, TRL is one of the 2, because when I got there in the beginning, we had Real World and Beavis and Butthead, and we had music video hours. And the Real World and Beavis and Butthead were getting, and I'm not lying with this number, about 25 times the rating of the music video hours. So literally, you could make 25 times the money if you put Real World on all the time.
Yeah.
And that's actually what they were kind of defaulting to, which was reruns of Real World all the time. And I think Real World, Paul and I looked at it, it was like 50% of the schedule at one point when we first arrived. And Beavis was already burning out. So there really was one show carrying the channel. And so we could have went down the pure reality, road, but I wanted to see if there was a third way we could do it where you fused music into long form.
Mm-hmm.
And the ultimate experiment with that was TRL, because TRL had a through line and a countdown and things that make long form television work. And it had personalities and all of that, but it still had music and music video and music stars. And so the fact that that began to have a heartbeat maybe 6 months to a year into its premiere was the biggest thrill. And that really became, ground zero for the channel.
Yeah.
And that really became, I think, the most important aspect of our identity. It became a cultural phenomena. And it's also improbable the way it just came together. So that one holds a special place in my heart. And then the other one is the Osbournes. It was the highest rated, or right up there with another one of my green lights, Jersey Shore. But the Osbournes to me represented the ultimate kind of expression of incredibly commercial and unexpected music-based television. And there was so much that was improbable about the Osbournes. For one, I was a 51-year-old rocker. So there were a lot of people inside MTV that wondered, why would you do, business with a 51-year-old? We're a channel for 21-year-olds. Rock was not a hot genre, as you probably remember. It was all about Britney. We were doing something with a family, and the channel was expressly non-family. We were spring breakers, and that was it. And so there was so much wrong with it, and yet it was just, subversive. And I think it also was during the era of George Bush trying to say that family values were really exclusionary. There was one definition of family, and this audience came along and showed you that you could be loving and be very different at the same time. So that one will always hold a very, very special place in my heart.
So with regard to Tierra, and this just popped into my head, I've never thought this before. Was Carson Daly our era's version of Casey Kasem with like the top 40 countdown and stuff? Right?
Absolutely.
I just never really made that kind of connection before. But, you talk about like TRL, and it was what that show became, which was, and I said it at the beginning, it was the place where every person who was in pop culture at that moment, whether it was an athlete, a music star, a celebrity, somebody who was on Page Six, like whoever, even politicians, I guess, at some point, were coming through that studio. I mean, the fact that there was so much sort of talent and sort of power in that was pretty amazing. And to think that MTV was sort of, what, 20 plus years into its run,
Yes.
to sort of create again that momentum in a network was incredible.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
really were kind of the heartbeat of youth culture.
Do you have a favorite TRL moment or favorite video from that era?
Oh my gosh. My favorite moments, because they were so insane, would have to be when NSYNC dropped their album and we had, I don't know, freaking 500,000 kids in Times Square. And just to look outside and see the physical expression of our success. Generally, when you make TV, it goes up on a satellite and you have no idea, how people are watching, if they're watching, but you could see the manifestation right in front of you. So that would have to be it. Or TRL, we hosted the Millennium, the 2000 celebration.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only kind of 3 years into my tenure, but everything was just starting to fire. And for some reason, I found myself standing next to Jay-Z, who I didn't know from Adam. And just like out of the music video, he has a giant bottle of Cristal and he hands it to me. And I remember thinking, I'm taking this swig and I'm the luckiest man that I'm standing here in this studio in TRL at this moment in time. How did this happen? So that's a
Yeah.
favorite moment. Yeah.
I mean, when I started, I was on the 29th floor, and you could hear the audience from Times Square up on the 29th floor when a big star was there. I'm surprised you couldn't hear them, in Santa Monica, honestly. I mean, it was crazy. It was so loud. Other than maybe the Knicks playing in the playoffs right now or in the finals, I don't think you'll hear those noises again in New York City, really.
Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah.
And we kind of like emulated that with Spring Break and other kind of live destination programming where viewers could really put themselves in the audience that were there, because you're like, oh, it's everyday people. Even I have an opportunity of being in the MTV kind of experience by going to a Spring Break, or I can go down to MTV, TRL. So the fact that we were not just producing content, we were out there in front of the public as well. So that was a big
The
part.
ultimate, when I first got there, I was like, okay, shit, TV shows take 2 years to develop. but I know that we need some quick wins so that culturally everybody internally could get excited about their own power to do this. And so one of the very first things we did was that Wanna Be a VJ contest, if you remember that.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was the first time we used the studio. It was the first time we had, you know, thousands of kids in Times Square, and viewers, to your point, Andrew, could see themselves on TV. It was their channel. They were making it,
There you go.
and they
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
had a chance to be in the fabric of it. That was a very special moment just because it was an early win and we needed it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was going to ask. We had a lot of destination programming, as you mentioned, Jackass Sundays. I remember the Sunday Stew, the afternoon programming that related to MTV2, where we had some rock programming on Saturdays, Sucker Free Sunday. So when we were creating destination programming, was did that come from let's create a destination, or was it we have these shows that can theme together and based on ratings the audience can basically come in for 2 hours instead of us just programming a 30-minute show? So you obviously want to keep an audience in for as long as you can with back-to-back programming. So how did that destination kind of programming start?
No, that part really was a lot of science more than art, and I give Paul a lot of credit. We basically wanted to fish where the fish were, and they were home after school, and then they were available from 10 to 11 at night, which was kind of the surprise, and that's when a lot of primetime stuff had ended, or at least for younger people it ended, and they were available on the weekends. So it was kind of a default, let's see if we can't over time fill all of those spots, and we eventually did.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and then you're like, okay, now we have a destination that is now data and insight that you can take to development team and say, all right, we need a new comedy show focused on males 16 to 24, whatever it is. So you can start looking to fill those holes because you've already proven that destination and that audience is looking for that kind of programming.
Absolutely right. You can give some guidance to the development teams because they know what holes they have to fill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Anything you're thinking, Perry? you're like,
well, so Paul talked about the development process, and that in that process, multiple ideas that you think are great sometimes never make it to pilot, and then multiple shows never make it to air. Is there one show that you championed and expected to have a strong audience reaction, or run multiple seasons, or be a signature show for the channel, and then nothing? What was the story behind it, and what lessons did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, there's not one parent, there's like 400.
Okay.
And the great thing is no one remembers them as long as you have a few that work. I remember probably our highest hit ratio one year we launched, probably 30 shows a year, and 60% were being renewed. And that was a hugely successful year. And I remember telling my dad that we had this year, he doesn't know anything about television. And he was like 2 days later, he goes, let me get this right. You failed 4 out of 10 times and you had a good year. And he's like, I couldn't do that in my business. But I'm like, that's just the game.
Yeah.
There were many. The one I'm most embarrassed and proud of at the same time is one of my first green lights was a show called Syphil and Ollie. And it was 2 talking socks. And we put it on in prime time. And God bless my boss, Judy McGrath. I think I might have fired me if the very first thing was a very low rated show with 2 talking socks. But those were the kind of creative risks I wanted us to be able to take. Yeah. So lots of failures. And you fall in love with all your children. So when you greenlight them to the screening, you're like, damn, these are all going to be great. What happens is then I would start to see episode 1, 2, 3, 4 come in. And then you have a little bit more of a guarded sense about what you really have in hand.
What actually made you passionate about Syphil and Ollie? What made you want to put that on air, and what was your expectation for it?
Sure. A real artist voice behind it, right? So you know that a talent that is singular, subversive. NBC wasn't going to do any talking sock shows. Funny, and I just think young people love funny. That sounded so patronizing, but you know what I mean. So it was those things. I think it was against the grain. Would I do it again? A more seasoned executive did it? Probably not, but I'm I'm glad I could make the mistake and not get fired. One more thing about Sifl and Ollie. The most important thing is my boss let me fail, and she made a joke out of it, and we went on to the next one. And what I took away from that was to try and create a culture for my executives where when they failed, it was not held over their head. And one of the things I always would do is if a show failed and I knew that the team was passionate about it, I would make a call to Tony and say, look, I'm sorry you put your heart and soul into it next time. So that they always knew they were supported at the most vulnerable time or the time you most expect your boss to have something to say about it. And so those were the most important calls I made. They were more important than the celebratory calls for the ones that worked.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So you oversaw music programming and content across multiple networks. How involved were you on like MTV2, MTVU, and creating and launching Logo? So, what is your take on now transitioning to other networks and another focus?
I was involved with MTVU, MTV2, et cetera, because we had targeted those as really growth businesses back in the day when every new cable channel was more space where you could get an audience. We were also blessed to have specific leaders for those channels who were very good, but yet they relied on the MTV machine, the programming machine, for some of their needs. So it was improvised, but I was definitely involved with those. With Logo was a much more dedicated, singular effort that I have to give Matt Farber credit for. He was the person internally who just would not let this idea go. And God bless our bosses, it got traction, and it's impossible to overstate how controversial an idea it was at the time. Now it seems like nothing because there are YouTube gay influencers everywhere. But I remember when we launched Logo, we had done a 200-page binder telling the cable networks how to deal with all of the protests they were going to get. And I remember having phone calls with them and that kind of thing because we were, terror. We were really scared. But I had amazing bosses. And at the time, we ended up getting almost no pushback. And I couldn't quite figure out why. We even got advertising. So Procter and Gamble and other people came on. And so there had been a sea change, but kind of at the ground level. So for example, at P&G, they had a big gay and lesbian employee group. The people who bought ads didn't want to cross that employee group. So they had leverage. And there were lots of different people in the community that had stood up, been proud, had leverage that helped create a space for us to do this. But it's still, I just am inordinately proud of what it was for the time because it was needed for the time.
Yeah. Sort of beyond Drag Race, do you feel that Logo ever really reached its full potential?
No, I'm just going to be too honest for this podcast, but when Philippe Dumont came in, he only cared about making his personal bonus, and he did not care about growth. He did not care about diversity and inclusion one way or the other. He cared about wasn't making me money. And all the new channels, and that includes, I think, to some degree, MTV2, et cetera, anything that was slated for new investment, including, I don't think it was member Urge, but it was Spotify before there was Spotify.
Yep.
Things that could have been transformative for MTV were just killed. And Logo was one of those. It was just starved to death. And then they ended up running reruns of, TGIF sitcoms.
Yeah.
So it's a very sad thing. Fortunately, culturally, other platforms eclipsed it and it was not needed the same way. But yeah, really kind of sad.
Yeah. I used to do the music for Logo, and it was, I, I I mean, probably one of the highlights of my time there for many reasons, but, I still love the fact that we premiered both of Lady Gaga's videos first, or her first two videos on Logo, and then we had her as her first national TV performance with the Logo New Now Next Award.
Was there, Perry, and I remember it because Dave Mace was taking me from room to room introducing me to people. And I didn't know, Lady Gaga was brand new at the time.
Brand new.
And so he takes me in to say hi to Lady Gaga and didn't warn me that she was in like a 10-foot yellow spacesuit, with giant hills and I was like, okay, process this. What do I say to a woman in a 10-foot yellow spacesuit? But she was fantastic, but it was clear from that very moment that's like, okay, this is someone special.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about her was she also her persona, she didn't break her persona when she was not on stage either. Like she always acted in this persona, at least in the early years that I remember. Yeah, so even though I can say I've met her, I don't think I've actually really met her. You know what I mean?
Right. You didn't probably meet Stephanie at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What I loved about working with Paul and the offsites was I got to, and me being from London, we got to, interact with our counterpart from the international office, the London office. And I can't recall UK international programming that we aired, but I'm sure vice versa, they took programming that we were airing that was really successful. But today, my kids are watching Love Island UK on Netflix, and a lot of like international shows are really resonating with American audiences now. Did I miss, like, was there any kind of international programming that did well in the US? Was it early in the landscape?
It was a different time. I
Yeah.
remember I went to the EMAs. I saw Robbie Williams. You already knew who he was, I'm sure. And we came back and said, Perry may remember this. Let's break Robbie Williams. He obviously he's going to break in the US. He's everything. And we tried and tried and could not. And then I remember we went to whatever the Asian Music Awards were called and saw this artist named Rain, who was the biggest thing at the time and a precursor to all the K-pop now. We tried to break him, nothing. And it was just a time when the American audience didn't have visibility or care about anything beyond their own borders. It was pre-YouTube. They just didn't have the exposure.
Yeah.
And so it didn't really work in reverse. We would look for formats or things that the UK had done, but they also didn't, the international channels didn't quite have enough money to invent a lot of their own stuff.
Gotcha.
So the more valuable thing for them was for us to create shows they could use.
I remember that we did a Robbie Williams Cribs, which was so funny. But I guess it was a way for us to tap into emerging stars and then, create a diary or put them in an episode of Cribs like that. So I could see, us relying on the UK, offices for that side of it. But yeah, I mean, to me, but maybe it's because I'm English, the culture, the, phrases, the way English people interact together, that's, which we see on the Osbournes. That was probably why it was a big success. If it was, no pun intended, if it was like Bon Jovi's family, it may not be as, humorous as, a family from Birmingham and London.
One of the shows that was probably the biggest international hit by a bunch of metrics was Pimp My Ride. And Pimp My Ride in the US was kind of when I greenlit it, I thought, okay, this is a B at best, B minus. And it was probably always a B performer on our channel. It had a few months where it was an A, but it was not, it was not punked. It was not the Osbournes here in the US. But around the world, there was something almost, I guess, cartoonish about it. And it translated regardless of language. And it became the biggest international hit that we'd had.
And they had their own versions in every
Yeah.
region.
Yeah.
So are there any other sort of like MTV stories that you've been dying to tell that you've just never told? Or are you holding everything for your book?
There are so many stories. And every time we get together in some sort of reunion setting, it's just rich because we live some crazy shit. I mean, it's there's nothing predictable about the business we were in or working with talent or any of that. I have thought about writing a book, but it requires like kind of living backwards, living in the rearview mirror, and then going out and promoting it. And just talking about the past never seemed as interesting as living the future, or I don't perceive myself to be that interesting, perhaps. But there's a lot of great stuff. I'm so glad you're doing this podcast. I'm glad that other people have done retrospectives, especially now that for all practical purposes, MTV has, basically died. I don't say that in a bitchy way at all. It's just a fact of cable. And it didn't manage to escape the fate of its distribution system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the average age now is in the 50s. In fact, I'm sure it is.
Wait, isn't that what Freston told us too when we talked to him, Andrew? Yeah. Interesting. So you talked about not wanting to look back, and which means that we're going to look forward. So you have a new passion, songwriting. You've gone to school for it. You've been doing it for a while. Sort of give us the story behind your decision to pursue this and get a degree. And then when can we hear some music?
The irony is I think a lot of people associate with me with moving MTV from music videos to reality programming. But I went there because I loved music and I played with best buddies in a band that actually got paid to go play in bars for years. And I got myself through college by playing at a restaurant where the waiters and waitresses would sing standards and I would play along with them. So like music ran deep for me. And so I just started songwriting as a hobby, maybe in my 40s. And I always had so much respect for the Max Martins, everybody who kind of powered MTV. Songwriters were really my heroes more than artists. And so on a whim, because COVID, there was not enough to do, I just applied to Berkeley. And I used to walk by there when I was a student at Harvard and think, man, those kids are like 10 times cooler than I am. And, somehow I got in. So I just decided I got to try a new trick. Really, and I don't have any professional ambitions at this age. It was more just to see if I could be better at a craft that I always admired.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking.
No. But I mean, what's your is there a goal with it? Is there something that you want to achieve? Is there an artist that you work with? Is there a partner you work with? Is there, it, I don't
Tell
know.
him
You want
more.
to score a TV show or a movie or something, or
Yeah, I would love television shows just because that's something that I'm really familiar with. And I think that'd be a lot of fun. But for me, it was just about the act of creating songs and getting the degree. It really wasn't about anything beyond that. I kind
yeah,
of trust life will take me there if it's meant to be, and if not, so be it. But our business is changing. There's not as much TV to make anymore, and so I wanted to still be making something.
Love that.
Also,
Love
the
that.
TV shows take it would take 3 or 4 years from the time we would conceive them at the production company to when they might get on air. A song, I can have an idea on a Monday, and by Friday, I can have a pretty good sketch. That was really nice to have something in your life that paid off faster in here.
sure, absolutely. So on the TV side, is there anything that is currently in production or that you've got coming up that we can see at some point?
Yeah, the last thing we did was in partnership with Wanda Sykes. We did a documentary for Netflix called Outstanding, and it basically traced the history of the gay civil rights movement through the eyes of the comedians who spoke up first. We just sold last week, got a pickup on a show for HBO that is the most insane murder story ever. And it happens to be about a murderer who was one of our social friends for 12 years until we realized he was a murderer. So he's been to my house many times.
Wait. This is a true story?
A true story that
Oh
we
my
sold
God.
ID/HBO Max.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I can give a little tease of the story because this is all public, but he was a social friend. He had actually cured one of my good friends of HIV. He was a doctor. He was an international kind of star in that area. We met him because he was dating a friend of ours. And our friend was enamored with this Turkish doctor who had a big penthouse here on Doheny. And so he just became a part of our circle in our life. And he took his company public on the NASDAQ with this cure. The company became worth $500 million overnight. He became worth $100 million overnight. He and his partner, who had been our friend, start living this high life. It starts to get a little weird because like security guards and things are showing up at their house and things aren't quite adding up, but yet he had credibly cured a friend that's for real. He had actually done that and the science would be later validated. His new company was duplicating that cure with FDA coordination with real medical tests. So that part was not a fraud. However, I pick up the Wall Street Journal in Mexico one day, 3-4 years ago now, and it says he's arrested for murder. And I'm like, what the? And it turns out that he was never a doctor. He had been a street musician in Turkey and had sort of learned to con people. He was a genius and really loved medicine. And he managed to con everybody, including all these investors at the highest level for 20 years. But along the way, somebody he had wronged in business was threatening to out him, and it would have ruined his big payday in the stock market. And so he had him offed. He hired a hitman and had him killed, and he's now just been sentenced and is in prison. So there you go. That's the story.
Wow, that
Well,
is great.
listen,
That's a great
I mean,
story, and we'll
have you sold this as a doc, or are you doing like an 8-episode like docudrama series?
It's a multi-part documentary, and I would save all the rest of the announcements for Discovery ID to be able to.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's
that's a
amazing.
great story. And
Everything
would
I've
make
shared.
great TV.
Yeah.
Wow.
So We're still
I
making
see.
documentaries for it.
I'm already casting it in my head. So, well, I mean, that's all the questions we had.
Yeah.
So,
Brian, it's been great to catch up.
Likewise.
Some really good stories. And yeah, appreciate your time.
My
yeah,
privilege.
thank
I'm
you
very
so
much.
much. This was, I mean, there, there's a big list of people who were sort of there's a list of people whose names associated with MTV at that time who are just sort of, I don't want to, okay, I'm going to say mythic, and yours was one of them. And to have you on the show has been sort of one of our white whales for a very long time. So thank you for doing it. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. So
Thank you guys for
That's
that,
why
and
we
I'm
do it.
glad you're both doing well.
thank you again for joining us. Please remember to rate, like, share, and review the show. And we will be back with a new episode next week. Thank you.